Well, this morning on the program, we'll be looking to join our guest who will join us virtually to discuss this and more. We'll be looking at it from the angle of the World Bank's call to the federal government to transition from policies to the people. Our guest who joins us virtually is an engineer with survey in the industry, Engineer Godwin Ibe, the MD/CEO, Sostenibili Energy and Infrastructure Limited, who joins us on the program virtually to discuss policy inconsistencies and its impact on the economy. Hello, good morning to you, Engineer. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. It's a pleasure being with you this morning.
Well, we're glad to have you join us. Let's start with one of the most recurrent questions people ask following the running of three budget cycles concurrently. People talk about fiscal policy, accountability, and transparency in the spending of public funds. Now, when you look at it in correlation to policy inconsistency and its impact on the economy, would we have to fault any institutions, or is Nigeria's problem one that is peculiar of some sorts? Hello, engineer, can you hear me? Well,
And as a result of the lack of discipline and accountability in the system, on the average, off level or high level of accountability and discipline in the system.
now, when you talk about discipline, are we talking about fiscal responsibility? What type of discipline are you referring to in fact? Well, it may seem as though Engineer Godwin's internet connection is not too stable. We do apologize. As soon as he can, he would rejoin us. Borrowing from his opening comments in response to my first question on the program, he says it has to do with discipline. And by inference, I was asking if it's this discipline, are we referring to fiscal discipline? Discipline in what aspects? On whose path? The governments, the institutions? Oh, also waiting for Engineer Godwin Ibe to rejoin us. I did also write a piece on the fiscal discipline in my perspective as to what I inferred. And it's from the angle of overlapping budget cycles, fiscal responsibility versus fiscal confusion. Now, many Nigerians are confused as to how to hold government accountable in terms of their spending, particularly with the peculiarities that greeting the year 2025 when we have three budget cycles running concurrently. So for weeks on ending, there was a second extension of the 2024 budget by the National Assembly, and it generated significant public outcry, sparking debates of the existence of similar practices in India, in Indonesia, and in Kenya, which is an African neighbor. So many would argue that this situation is not peculiar to Nigeria alone. But in borrowing examples, can we copy the right things? Now, the conversations around budget analysis and expenditure, particularly from the angle of tracking, is beginning to gain momentum amongst Nigerians. Now, many people look at the National Assembly, and there's obviously the notion and the misuse of the word or the catchphrase budget pardon. But in
I should
disagreeing with
rejoin,
the,
eh? Okay.
all right,
Let me.
beautiful engineer Godwin, we can hear you now. Are you ready to rejoin us?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here with you.
All right, let's pick up from where you left off, talking about discipline. I was looking to infer what you meant by discipline. Are we talking about fiscal responsibility, discipline on whose part, the institutions or the government?
When I talk of discipline, it's discipline in all ramification. In this institutional discipline, political discipline, social discipline, and it cuts across the board. Sorry to say, in those days when we grew up, many decades back, we there was a much higher level of discipline, educational discipline, academic discipline, social discipline. Even the politicians in those days, our forefathers, they had a high level of discipline, even though we cannot say they are perfect, and they were able to achieve a lot, during the time they spent. governing over us. Are you with me?
Yes, I'm with you.
Yes, yes, yes. So it's discipline in all ramifications, just across board. You look, you check it out. You know,
I quite agree with you. Now let's narrow it down since we have a system of government, and when people look to hold persons accountable, they say leaders ought to be held accountable. I was given a background into some of our current economic realities, and starting with government spending, the legality of running concurrent budget cycles have been debated. It's also on the provisions of what the law says is permissible. Under the current fiscal laws, it looks as though Nigeria is allowed to copy the likes of India and Kenya, where you can have multiple budget cycles running concurrently. In ensuring fiscal responsibility or fiscal discipline, how do we keep with this tradition or break from it, in your opinion?
you see, every environment has its own peculiarities, and they should be treated on its own merit. The kind of governance structure in Kenya and India is not exactly like here. And apart from it, the people there are quite different from us. And then the institutions there appear to be a little bit more organized and more resilient than we have. Take India, for example. India has passed through decades of democracy, starting from Indira Gandhi and all the past leader they have. So they have been able to institutionalize accountability and discipline to very high degree compared with us. So we cannot just go and copycat India or copycat Kenya, who are far more stable than us. And at any rate, they haven't had that much instability, political instability. Take for Nigeria, for example, we have had coups upon coups, government upon governments, and so on. But in India, they have had transitional government through democracy, same as in Kenya. But ours has been quite unstable, and that is a part of the fundamental problem we have in our national life and the economy.
Now, bringing my questions to the institutions that are supposed to work in synergy but checkmate each other through the separation of power ideology is the function of the National Assembly. This morning, reports are making the rounds that the Senate is halting certain plans whilst they wait for the 2024 budget performance report before entertaining proposals on the 2026 fiscal plans. It's also when money is appropriated for certain spendings. On top of the list is $18 billion spent on turning around refineries across the nation, which are non-functional by many reports. What do you make of the National Assembly's obligatory duty to oversight some of these spendings and also help keep the executive in check when it comes to public financial management?
Well, what I'm going to say now is my personal and convinced opinion, and I stand to be challenged. The separation of power, as in the current dispensation, is not the best. It's not the best. It's not the best. We are not really getting the real benefit of separation of power. It does appear the executive has a stronghold on the National Assembly and to a large extent to the judiciary. And so where then lies the separation of power? I have had, and I'm sure many of us have had, the National Assembly on your mandate to stand. You shouldn't stand on anybody's mandate. You stand on your own mandate and go by the rules of the game. But as it is, it's not quite so. And that is part of the problem we have currently.
In fixing this problem, what would you prefer?
Sorry, come back with that.
In a bid to try and fix this problem where you feel as though it's not obtainable or attainable in Nigeria as it ought to be, how do we fix the problem?
The problem again ties to, like I said, discipline. From rank and file discipline, across the board discipline. Everybody is and everybody should be accountable. to his responsibilities, and then transparency should be paramount. But where these qualities of value system are lacking, it's cause for concern. A few hours ago, I was listening to our celebrated legendary leader and administrator, Dr. Christopher Collady of blessed memory. He was given a 5 point guide of the way of life and way of in everything, you know. So all those qualities, value system, seem to have been lost, and then it's like everybody is doing things his own way, you know. And of course, the issue of corruption also, which is stench, which has its own stench on this on the policy, is also there. So things should be done according to the rules of the game. The rules of the games are there, but it's not strictly being followed, and that's a cause for concern, to most people.
Now, quite interestingly, is the presence of gentlemen of the Fourth Estate of the Realm and media organizations, much like ours, that owe Nigerians the due diligence of ethical practice, investigative journalism, uncovering some of these controversial or confusing ways of running government in the country. Reports come in each day, but they are rebutted by most handlers of the government. Talking about one of those reports is the World Bank's position on Nigeria's economy and our poverty index. The report is that 139 million Nigerians are now below multidimensional poverty, an increase of 6 million from their earlier report that had earlier reported 133 million Nigerians. But the federal government has refuted the credibility of this report, whilst we have some other political parties in the likes of ADC saying that it is not any different from Nigerians' realities. I'd like to ask you, do you agree with the World Bank report, or do you side the federal government's position that it is far detached from the current realities on ground with some of the gains of the renewed hope agenda?
Well, I haven't read the report in detail, but from what I know of the economy, things are not in the best of shape. Nigeria is there's a whole lot of poverty in Nigeria, So to just dispel the World Bank report, I'll be a little bit careful, And at any rate, our government media people, they always good at refuting or challenging such reports of world bodies, which is part of their role anyway, but then we should be bold and courageous to accept the truth. It is noble to accept the truth, about our economy. That's the only way we can get help. And I tell you, remind you, whether we deny or not, what is happening to us is in the public domain. you know our government media people may argue with IMF, but beyond IMF, people in the public domain globally, they know the truth. So there isn't much to hide about our state of economy, about poverty status in Nigeria, about inconsistency of policies in Nigeria. There is not much to hide. We can only pretend, and but the truth is there in the global domain.
Now, whilst the truth might be relative in the words of some famous philosopher, we talk about the policies that have put Nigeria in this position, the peculiar position we're in, because some of those recommendations also came from the World Bank and other Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF that advised the government to remove subsidies in the petroleum sector and subsidies in the electricity sector as well. At that point, the federal government did not have this disagreements with those institutions, but they adopted some of their recommendations. Why are they disagreeing with the reports that are coming off the back of such recommendations? Shouldn't the government have envisioned that this would play out in terms of some of the realities on ground? And this brings me to my question on policies. Could these policies have been better implemented or staggered to have bettered the lives of Nigerians or created buffers not to allow Nigerians be hard hit by the impact?
There is no disagreement about the need for all such policies. Everybody agrees both local and global bodies. But it's the manner of implementation that matters, that causes the difference. For example, the removal of subsidy was a great thing, but not many people are convinced that it was properly implemented. Maybe some time would have been given and things planned out and buffers created to absorb the shock. But the shock came like a wild wind, and so everything was instantly, adversely and severely affected. So the realities of the genuineness of such policies is not in any way debatable. It's the manner of implementation which has been the bane of our problem. We have the policies, we have the documents, we have the guidelines, but implementation has always been a problem. And that is where the greatest challenge is with us.
Now, Engineer Godwin, sir, I don't know what are some of the stopgap mechanisms that can be put in place. I know we have brilliant laws, but implementation and enforcement always is a challenge. What are some recommendations in being able to hold governments accountable or review certain policies in terms of monitoring and evaluation of the implementation so as not to fall shy of some of our targeted outcomes?
In my line of discussion, number one will be consequence management. If anybody is found guilty of any malpractice, it should be punished for it. That's number one. Number two, we should put more priority on governance than on politics. But it does appear that the priority is far more on politics than on governance, and it is governance that really affect the people in a positive manner, and the way that is going to improve their quality of life. And then of course, corruption is tension in the economy. The level of corruption is intolerable. But somehow, some way, somewhat, it seems that the system is kind of glossing over it as if it's not an issue. So that's some of the things that I think should be properly put in place. For example, somebody breaks the law or steals money, then you should go in for it. Not use political what's it called, political words or jingoism to cover it up. So these are the things that matter in the system. I remember in those days when you have war against indiscipline, and it looks like they were quite genuine. People, they fall in line and keep to the rules of the game. But where it's like everybody is doing things its own way, then you have this kind of situation where things seem to be getting worse over the period.
Now, we're far from being a banana republic, and hence we have institutions of government, more or less at a time when the president of the Senate, Senator Godswill Akpabio, following resumption of plenary after recess, in his speech to Nigerians, said that the 10th National Assembly is one that would yield results. It's beginning to look as though the body language of the red chambers in particular is looking to have some accountability stop gaps in place. Now, 2026 is around the corner. Recommendations are that we submit our budget cycles. So, in keeping with January to December, the Senate is looking to halt the 2026 budget pending reports from the concurrently running budgets of 2024 and 2025, saying that they have concerns over spending and accountability. What do you make from this position of the Senate as regards the stopgaps which you've talked about?
Well, I haven't actually seen much of that report, but then from what we know, I think there should be a collaboration, among the between the levels of government, so that things can be properly arrived at and agreed on. And then we should also be sure that we are sincerity of purpose, so that we are not just, they are not just trying to cover themselves up, or trying to cover the thing that they are planning to do, which may not be the best for the nation. So yes, there should be discussions, and there should be sincerity of purpose. There should be accountability, and there should be serious discussions on these issues.
All right, now let me come into your field a little bit more and we'll look at the laws governing them. Nigerians had clamored for better laws to regulate oil exploration in the country. 2022 gave us the birth of the Petroleum Industry Act, a PIA, a document that mandated certain derivations and the payment of certain percentages to host communities. But over time, these communities have lamented that these laws have not been translated in their entireties. Engineer Godwin, looking at the PIA, do you have any challenges with this document? And would you say that there are some needs for amendment of certain laws in some regards?
Thank you. I think that's a very useful question and very important too. If you recall, it took like 20 years, nearly 20 years, for the PIA, was then called PIB, to be signed into law, to become PIA, Petroleum Industry Act. And that was by President Mohamed Buhari in August 2021. And prior to that, in terms of fiscal governance, administrative, and regulatory matters, what was existing was not fit for purpose. And after decades, many years, almost 2 decades of discussion, it went through several national assemblies, I think 6 or 7 or so. And then President Buhari took the bull by the horn and signed it into law. And the PIA was designed to improve fiscal measures, regulatory measures, administration, and governance of the oil and gas industry activities. And it promised efficiency, it promised transparency, and it promised renewed investment confidence. And actually, when the PIA was signed into law, it was hailed. Yes, it wasn't perfect, but then it should have we will allow it to run for a while, But in less than 5 years, you know, we now have strong speculation that the government trying to amend key provisions of the act, which in itself is not good enough. We have not used it long enough, to have learned through the ropes, on the provisions of the law. And then we're talking of fundamental modification, fundamental changes. There are negative effects and negative impact on the economy if that is allowed to go. Though it's still very speculative. Things like the oil revenue that is earmarked for frontier exploration, you know, um, to be
That
reduced from
from
from that
30% to 5%.
yeah, 30% to 5%.
On
And we
that,
hear
engineer, let's break there so that we carry our viewers along. On that, particularly from the angle of the impact on the economy, what would this translate to? Because Nigerians are speculative. There's a new tax regime to start on the 1st of January. Now we're also looking at a change in oil revenue sharing. What would this drop from 30% to 5% do for exploration, which is now termed frontier oil exploration?
if I recall, during the nearly 20 years of debate, that was a very strong bone of contention, which, in my view, was much more political than real. Because the so-called frontier basins, there are some of the basins that have been explored for decades, and yet not much is gotten out of them. Meanwhile, you have areas, you have low-hanging fruits. Why don't you devote more fund to such areas and gradually go into the frontiers areas, which are far more speculative than real? But in the Niger Delta, a lot of work has been done. We have a lot of knowledge about the reservoirs. There are reservoir mechanisms and the productions. So in my view, personal view, we should focus more on that, on the Niger Delta area, while still having what do you call it, peep into the frontier basins, rather than spending the whole money on the frontier basin. In my view, this maybe just good enough modification. The only downside of it is that foreign investors will think you people are not serious. You are always changing your policies, with reckless abandon.
All right, quite explained. Now let's come to the other parts of another speculations as to what might need amending. Is also the provision that the NUPRC would now take up regulatory function of the NNPCL. It's coming at a time when there's also debates on what the contract sharing formula is in respect to a certain 210 trillion naira audit of the NNPCL. Let's get your thoughts on this.
The NUPRC was designed to be a regulator, not an operator. It's designed to be a regulator per the PIA Act and Nigerian Upstream Petrol Regulatory Commission on one hand for upstream activities, and then the NMDPRA, Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Authority for midstream and downstream activities. But from the speculation we hear, it's like NNPC, NUPRC, want to assume the responsibility of handling NNPC contracts. In other words, making them um, operator and regulator at the same time, which is totally uncalled for. They should remain as regulators while others will operate, not having a dual role of being a regulator and operator. That, in other words, regulating itself. There should be division of responsibilities as proposed by the PIA.
Now, coming to other angles of the recommendations for further amendments, are you satisfied with the current provisions of the derivation fund?
Well, position of derivation fund, there's always room for improvement, significant improvement. It's just bits and pieces. If you recall, over the time we have had various government uh, plans and proposals. You have UNPADEC, you have NDDC, and you have PIA now. So there's room for a significant improvement. And at any rate, evidence is makes up the end of argument. If you go to those communities, that produce the oil, do you see enough evidence to show that they are enjoying the fruits of their labor in terms of oil in their land, in terms of environmental damage, in terms of benefits, as an oil producing areas? If you ask me, I think there's a wide room for improvement in that regard.
Now, some of the improvements recommended is the creation of another fund on the side to be known as the Host Community Development Fund, where host communities will get 3% apart from the 13% derivation fund. Is this sufficient enough? Would it change the metrics to ensure that the proper social amenities and infrastructures that some of these riverine communities need and access to good water and health care are provided for?
Well, that in my view is a good starting point, but that will need to be improved upon so that we can really feel the impact of of uh, of oil and gas production in those areas. But if you ask me, the impact is not quite visible. It could be much better. For instance, if you go to Goniland now, or some of these other oil producing areas, it's not.
No, engineer, I like your example of Ogoniland in specific. It brings to mind some of the injustices that have been done to Ogoniland. Off the back of Thursday's Council of State meeting presided over by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, certain pardons were given to the likes of Ken Saro-Wiwa. Preceding that, there were also pardons for the Ogoni 9 as well. Apart from these pardons, talking about the cleanup and the level of restoration that Ogoniland needs, how would you assess successive efforts by different governments?
I think it's not quite 2 weeks or so that the president gave an executive order that activities should kickstart or restart again in Ogoniland. I think the um, security advisor, national security advisor, is spearheading that on behalf of the government. And then, not quite a few days after that order from the president, the Ogoni people, some group in Ogoni say, sorry, we do not accept that. We have been cheated for so long. We do not believe what you people are saying, and all the outstanding issues have not been addressed. So why are you coming back to Ogoni land to look for oil? It looks like what is more important to you people or the country is oil, not the benefits of not what it benefits or what it's going to do for the Ogoni people. And so they rejected it, and there's a debacle again. And the fundamental thing is that there's a trust has been lost, between Ogoni people on one hand and the nation at large. And you wouldn't blame them, because over the decades they have felt so cheated, and so ignored. But it will take quite a bit of effort to rebuild the trust, so that we can have license to operate in those areas of oil and gas production in Ogoni land.
Now let's come to the issue of financial management. When it comes to the finances, no news that Nigeria derives largely over 90% of its revenue from oil proceeds. But when it comes to the management of the NNPCL, now changed to a limited liability, both the petroleum and finance ministries play more or less an intertwining function. The petroleum ministry provides the technical, while the finance ministry provides the financial accountability guideline. But with the need for amendments in the PIA, it seems to be a majority of recommendation that it should be overseen by the finance ministry. Do you quite agree with this recommendation?
Well, like I said before, it's still speculative. It's not been implemented. But it is on speculation. And then, even at that, there's a lot of debate going on. We hear that the Federal Ministry of Finance, not the Petroleum Ministry, would become the sole manager of NNPC. I do not agree with that. Finance Ministry has its responsibilities, and then the Petroleum Ministry should have their own too. But to say the Finance Ministry should come and oversee or be the manager of NNPC, I think there's a mismatch there, and that may not augur well if it's implemented. And like I said before, all this tantamount to policy inconsistency, which is not good for us. Investor will be laughing at us and having a feeling, and rightly too, that we are not consistent. You know, for instance, if they bring their money to invest here, how are they sure that the next year or thereabout there won't be a change? And then it'd be like it's a sink hole for fund. Unlike in other climes that have policy consistency for decades. For example, South Korea, their policies, they execute them for over decades, 50 years or thereabout. you know. So any investor that is coming knows what is on ground and knows that for long term he can reap benefit from his investment. Not invest today, tomorrow there's a change in policy, and you go back, and then the next 2 years there's a change in policy, which adversely affects your business. In fact, all this inconsistency in policy, it tends to kill business, and scare investors who would otherwise have come in to support your economic development.
Well,
Sorry, I lost you now.
I said we have a little less than 5 minutes as we look to wrap up on our discussion this morning.
Thank you.
I would like to recount what you said at the start of our discussion, where you referenced the aim of the PIA in its entirety to create stability in the oil and gas sector, providing the enabling laws. Now, for governance and stability, this amendment to the PIA vis-a-vis the need to divest our joint venture equities and the way investors will perceive us. What would be your concluding thoughts as you prefer a line for the government to toe to achieve this?
There is always a period for learning. If you ask me, I would recommend that we operate the PIA for a little while, maybe 5, 10 years, while we note, the learning points and convince ourselves that certain aspects need to be amended. Assuming we do this amendment now, who knows? Maybe a new government comes in and they want to change it again. That's a prevarication in policy making, which is not good for us. So let's operate it for a little while, maybe 10 years. Learn the ropes, make notes our comments, and then if there are gray areas, those can then be addressed, rather than just within a twinkle of an eye, so to say. You want to amend them, and if you dig deep, you may find out that you know most of these changes, or many of these changes, may be political, not as a result of the initial intent of the PIA, to improve fiscal, regulatory, administrative, and governance posture of the economy of the oil and gas industry. That would be my concluding remark.
Well, I must thank you, Engineer Godwin Ibe, for taking our time to revisit this discussion on the program this morning in the hope that we have better policy implementation that translates into accountability in terms of public finance management. We appreciate you, sir.
Thank you very much. And on a last note, this is the kind of thing that Sustainability is cut out for. We are not into contract execution, big time contract execution, and all that. We're just set out to advise governments at all levels, organizations at all levels, so that things can be better managed, to the benefit of the energy and infrastructure industry. So on that note, I think I would like to appreciate you giving us the opportunity to have this discussion.
Well, you're much welcome, sir. We appreciate you, and thanks for informing Nigerians as to the role in which you play to ensure this accountability and transparency as we demand of the government.